when you look at a lot of the research papers, there's a constant theme in there, and that is that people are moving to another organization because it ties in closer to their purpose.
Hello, and you're with Aveline Clark on the 6-Star Business Podcast, where we have conversations about what it takes to be 6-star as a 6-star leader in a 6-star business in a 6-star world. And in today's episode, I sat down with the wonderful Luke Jamieson. Luke is an employee engagement expert. He's been in the industry for quite a long time. And more specifically, he's been at the forefront of the innovation in this industry as we see that gamification has come into the field and really shaken things up for people and given organizations another tool in their tool belt to really help engagement. But where Luke comes from, he comes from purpose, he comes from heart, and this conversation brings all of that together. And I invite you to sit back and listen to the lovely Luke Jamieson. Good afternoon, Luke Jamieson, Indra Hoffman. It is so good to have you both here on the 6-Star Business Podcast. Welcome.
Thanks for having me.
Hi,
Thank
Luke.
you.
Hi, Ev.
Hello. Thanks for being my co-host today, Indra. Luke, I'm really excited to be having this conversation with you, and I'm really keen to get started. So, like we always kick things off with our guests. If you could give us a bit of information about who you are, just like who you are, where you are in the world, who do you serve, how do you serve them, and maybe tell us something you like to do when you're not working.
Ooh. All right. It's a big question, multifaceted question. Let's start with who I am. I think that'll be unpacked through the episode. So maybe let's wait for that one. But who I serve, I work for a company called Centrical. I'm the regional director for Centrical here in the Australia New Zealand region, and we are a employee engagement company at heart. And so that's one of my passions. It's something I am deeply passionate about. I won't say obsessed, because I think everyone says, "Oh, are you obsessed with this?" But no, I'm not obsessed. I'm deeply passionate about employee experience and customer experience. And where am I? I'm currently in Melbourne. I'm at my house today doing a bit of work from home, and just so I can be a bit closer to got the better setup here for the mic. So yeah.
Very good. Nice to have you. I'm looking forward to learning more about who you are. You've certainly dropped the little carrot there in front of us. So perhaps would you like to tell us a little bit about your background or your journey? What's brought you to this point here today?
Yeah, look, it's a long one. Whenever I get asked that question, I always just roll it right back to the very beginning, because I think it's I think it's an interesting story when I look back on it. I kind of wonder how I got here sometimes. I left school at a very early age and went and started an apprenticeship as a baker and pastry chef. Every single one of my family since the first fleet has been a blue collar worker, and so I thought that was my lot in life. So I went and did that, and it's a noble profession. I loved it. Lots of creativity in that space, but your mates do become pretty scarce when you're working at midnight till sort of 8 to 10 a.m. in the morning, 6 days a week. So I wanted to do something else. I wasn't sure what that was. I always enjoyed leadership. I always enjoyed getting out in front of people and speaking, and baking is not so good for that. And so I ended up getting a sales role in an advertising company, which was kind of more who you know than what you know, and that was a lot of fun. I got to be very creative. I learned a lot about advertising, a lot about sales, and also had the opportunity to do some graphic design in that space as well, which was fun because I got to be creative. And then I then moved to Melbourne, and for as most guys are probably going to move up and leave their house for only one reason, and that was for a girl. And so I moved to Melbourne, and lo and behold, I actually fell more in love with the city, and stayed here. But I couldn't get another job as a graphic designer and advertising, so I ended up getting a job in a contact center, and I thought it was just going to be just a little stopgap until I found what I really wanted. So I remember the first day taking that phone call, freaking out, but I also realized soon after joining, it was MLC, a financial services company. I remember just thinking, wow, this is an industry that was ripe for disruption, and really could, at that time, customers were not the center focus. It wasn't a customer focused environment. It was a more just deal with this and don't talk about it. Be don't even be seen, don't be heard. Just as long as you're not ruining everything, it's a hygiene factor. Let it be, and it was great because I was able to stick around that industry. I became really passionate about it, passionate about customer service, customer experience. Really always thought that there needed to be, things like the chief customer officer role, which we kind of take for granted these days. But I think, over a period of time, I saw the shift become that where we became the customer experience became its own thing. I think social media played a massive part of that, giving everyone a voice to be able to uh, share their experience. And I remember working for organizations that didn't even have a Twitter account and freaking out when someone tweeted about them. They're like, how do we respond to this? And then your 148 characters or whatever it was would have to go to legal and get sign off. And by the time you finally responded 2 weeks later, the world had moved on. And so I've seen this shift, and shift in how we deal with things like social channels and our approach to them. And it's okay to be casual and all that sort of space. And stop me at any time. I know yeah, by all means, if you want to dive in on any of this stuff. But this is kind of my journey, and then through that process, I was always pretty much in leadership roles, which I was very lucky and blessed to be in those roles, and to be given the opportunity to lead people. I think is such an honor, and I always thought I needed to do better by my people, and that was always something. As a manager, I was trying to figure out how do you take these company goals and these company mandates and make them personal enough that everyone has buy-in on them. And because that, to me, that was important. It was important because I think that often, like me, when I joined the contact center for the very first time, I was almost ashamed of the role and ashamed of saying that I worked in a contact center, and you would, it came with such a stigma. And I think sometimes that stigma still sits around. It's an entry level role, low skill kind of role, which is absolute rubbish because it's actually extremely highly skilled role. And I remember, just those feelings for myself, and I wanted my people that worked with me and for me, that for them to understand that it's actually a worthy role. And so how do you create these environments that allow people to embrace that role, love what they do, understand the meaning and the purpose behind the job. And it led me to this whole thing around gamification, which, at the time it wasn't, gamification wasn't really sort of a mainstream thing. I'm not even sure gamification was a word at the time. And but for me, it was all around seeing that people brought different things to their roles. You had these people who were champions. Yeah, you had these people who were like champions for your cause and big on being social. You had these people who loved just the KPI side of things and achieving goals. You had these people who loved uh, sharing their knowledge and sharing with other people, and yet we kind of only recognized one or two types of people. And so for me, I came across this idea of of recognizing people for their strengths and working together, and using things like gamification, like game mechanics, reward, like badges and leaderboards and stories and missions to be able to foster those feelings. And that kind of led me to this whole space where I'd implemented gamification in a number of organizations. And what ended up happening is that there was a lot of people, a lot of platforms all of a sudden started emerging out of what seemed like thin air, that were able to support these things that we'd done in contact centers for years, where we'd put things up on whiteboards and walls and we'd had arts and crafts days to kind of create these amazing sort of games and everything. These platforms were now doing it digitally, and so there was this time of adoption where people were going, I don't know how to do it, or they'd implemented the software and then gone, it's not actually delivering what we thought. How do we tune this? And so then all of these people started coming to me and asking me about it. They would companies would say, can you come and work for us and help us implement it? I would have platform companies going, hey, you've implemented this, can you help us implement it with a client? And so it was this really nice little niche that I sort of found. And that's, there's a whole heap of sort of things that have happened in between there, but that was kind of the catalyst for me starting my own business, which was called Playfully at the time. And it was a consulting business around and services business around employee engagement and gamification. And so I was helping organizations try and do gamification for good, take away this unfortunately, gamification has had sort of these really great times and these really awful times where people have tried to implemented it at its basic level, slapped some badges on some KPIs, and then said, yeah, we've got a gamified solution. And then, most people kind of become either disincentivized by it because it's short term, maybe it's a little bit condescending, and it's really not tapping into those intrinsic motivators of humans. And so anyway, long story long, as it always seems to be with me, I kept what happened is when I was a consultant, I kept referring people to one particular platform in particular, which was Centrical, and that's because I felt like it was the only holistic solution in the market that was actually solving for a whole heap of problems and was also able to deliver on what they promised. And as a consultant, the one thing you never want to be is sort of single point dependent on a vendor. You don't want to. You want to be as agnostic as possible, and I totally was not agnostic. So Centrical and I started talking, and that's when I then became Centrical here in Australia, and have grown that business over the last couple of years here in this region. And it's been a great time with them because not only do I get to be regional director and see this business in this region grow, but they've also allowed me to do a whole heap of things creatively, and they've done exactly what I always try to do with my people who work with me, and they've found what is my key strengths, and then they've leaned into that and helped me. And so I tend to write a lot about this space, and they allowing me to be very, for lack of a better word, evangelical in this space for them, which is a lot of fun. So I'm having a ball. So anyway, wow, you guys have been drinking from the fire hydrant for probably 5-6 minutes now. Let's pause because it's more a dialogue than a conversation. So
but these stories are just so fun and interesting, and that's how we get to know who you are. And I'm fascinated. I've got a bunch of questions for you. So because you said so much in there, and the journey itself obviously was really interesting to go from pastry chef, into that call center, and obviously something activated or ignited in you when you were working in the contact center, uh, to make you realize that you wanted to help people's experiences, right?
Mm.
And make them feel good when they came into work. Do you know when that moment was, or what
Oh yeah,
happened?
probably yeah. I reckon that's an awesome question. I don't think I've ever been asked that before, so that's a great one. I do distinctly remember me being very, very bad at average handle time. I was the talker, if you can't tell. I would happily have the conversation if superannuation's an interesting one. It's an industry. Maybe if you're on the other side of the globe listening, it's probably similar to a 401k. It's your retirement fund. The people that often call are the people that need that money, and they're either in financial hardship, which is always a very hard place to be for anyone, or they're nearing retirement, and they're about to hit this huge milestone. And those in particular, they love to have a chat. Financial hardship. They're sharing their story around how they got to that point. Retirees want to tell you their life story. Some of them are actually very lonely and just want to have a chat. And it might not be about the product at all. It might be just about what the specials are going on at Woolworths at the moment. And so I was always happy to have those conversations because I thought, you know what, this is the experience that someone wants. If they want to speak, I want to be here to listen. I want to embrace that. Obviously, that doesn't always work in a contact center scenario. You've got people who are like, you've got to get 12 calls per hour, and I'm probably doing like 4. And there was this scenario where I would be whinging about other people who are doing like 30 calls an hour, and I'm like, I'm picking up their mess, and this isn't working, and they're whinging about me because I'm not doing enough work. And I always thought that was an interesting conundrum that was worth solving for. And I think that there's a place for everyone's skills, especially in that environment. And you need people who are going to be able to churn out lots of calls. You need people who are going to be able to take the time and spend those moments of truth with customers. And so part of that for me, that was one of those moments of how do we shift the traditional ways of working, in particular in a contact center, where it's really regimented, highly restrictive around shifts and how much you can talk and all this sort of stuff, to actually become more customer focused. So that was probably my moment.
Um, Thank you for that. And as you were talking, it felt to me like you were on the cusp of that wave of gamification. Using gamification for employee engagement. Did you realize that you were at the forefront of that new movement at the time it was happening?
Yeah, sort of. I think in I mean, there's some amazing thought leaders in this space. Like, I think if you think of someone like Yukai Chao, undeniably he's probably one of the leaders in this space. But uh, when and funny enough, he and I often we kind of have the same game that we used to play that actually spurred on our thinking around this. And I think independently, there was this realization. And it's funny, when I read his book, I was like, "Oh my god, that was the same game that I was playing, and this is the same thing." And the game itself was called Diablo, and the game, when you play this game, it really hooks you in to keep playing. Like, I don't think I've ever. I'm not a huge gamer these days, but back when I had time on my hands to actually play games, I loved this game, and I would sink hours and hours into it. And it had a great way of keeping you playing. And the way it did it is that you were either trying to level up your character. If you weren't trying to level up your character, you were trying to get to the end of the level. If you weren't trying to get to the end of the level, you were trying to hang around just a little bit long enough to get this rare exclusive drop. Or you were waiting for the next boss fight. Or potentially you were actually exploring parts of the map that you'd never explored. So there's always something going on. You're like, oh, and before you know it, 6 hours of your life has disappeared into this game. Um, and games have this amazing way of sucking you in and disconnecting you from reality. I think if you look at things like World of Warcraft, I haven't got the stats in front of me, but it's something ridiculous. Maybe Andrew, you can look it up while we're having a chat, maybe. But it's something crazy. It's something like over 1 million years have been played on this game. And when you think about that from a time investment, you think, well, imagine what we as a human race could do if we invested the same amount of time into maybe solving cancer. And so for me, it was this moment of, there's always something to do. There's always something that's going to keep you playing. There's always something that's going to try to keep you engaged. How do we apply that in a work environment? And yeah, to sort of go back to answering the initial question, did I ever realize? Kind of. And that is because everyone was then so interested in the success stories that had come from it. And it's easy to talk about the success stories. There was plenty of failures along the way as well. But yeah, people were really interested. And for those who had either tried it and failed, they were interested in how it succeeded. And then there was the curious people who were like, what the heck is gamification and this buzzword and what does it mean?
How could you bring enough game idea and to have people engaged, especially the leaders engaged, on top of delivering the bloody numbers, because it's all about the KPIs and how many people have been had issues have been resolved?
Yeah, good, awesome question. And I think when I think about gamification, it's more about a human science than it is about creating a game. I think if you set out to create a game, then often it just fails because it doesn't always. You need to understand what is the motivator behind it, and where I was mentioning sort of those different things that the different strengths that people bring. There's a guy by the name of Richard Bartle. So if anyone's listening, look him up. He came up with this game way back when, and it was a text-based game. And the game itself, he ended up creating this player profiles, and it's widely sort of referenced these days when it comes to gamification. But I think it still stands true for the most part. And that is that there was 4 different player types within his game. There was the killers who were all about achieving goals, and they would do anything to achieve this goal. Didn't matter. There was these people who were explorers who would unpack and unlock every little part of the game, find the Easter eggs, find the loopholes, find the shortcuts. There was the achievers who would work with others to achieve goals. And then there was the socializers who were there to just build relationships and chat. And when I looked across the contact center space that I was running, and pretty much you look at this in any work environment these days, you'll see the same thing. You'll start to recognize the people that kind of fit within those areas. And look, I'm not a huge fan of just profiling people, but generally speaking, you end up with one of these 4 quadrants. You have a strength in one of these spaces. And yet we only would recognize the killers because that was what was driving the bottom line. It's what we've taken these KPIs at a executive level, we've broken them down into the widgets and disseminated them all the way down to the front line and just widgetized people's roles. And then you wonder why people are no longer engaged. And so, what I did in that space was try to take those widgets and see what is the underlying strength that we need in that space. And it's not always just achieving a number. Some of it is about finding, recognizing the fact that somebody has found a more efficient way to do it. Sometimes it's about the fact that somebody has championed an idea and socialized an initiative that we wanted to drive. We don't often recognize the person that socialized that and championed that, and they're the things that we as particularly as leaders we need people who are going to get on board with what we're doing and help socialize our ideas. We need people who are going to tell us their silly ideas or find better ways to do them. We need people to achieve those goals. And we need people that are going to work with others and bring people together and collaborate to achieve these goals. And yet we would only ever build KPIs for one of them. So for me, the way I went out doing that was actually embracing people's core strengths and then finding ways to intrinsically reward them. So, it's not always easy to just throw money at a problem and get long-term solutions. So those extrinsic rewards, they're so loud. They scream louder than an intrinsic reward, yet they never last as long. And so it's the intrinsic rewards that they're a bit quieter, yet they last longer. And those intrinsic rewards, such as getting a sense of meaning, a sense of purpose, a sense of belonging, a sense of achievement, those if we can foster those within people, they're more likely to stick around. They're more engaged. They enjoy their work more, and there's ways to do that in through things like gamification, because you have this amazing idea. You can all of a sudden tell a story. I think when you just talk about a KPI, it's really hard to put a story around a KPI. But from a game perspective, you can apply a story. And stories always ask the question, what's next? So it brings people back. It keeps people engaged. This sense of achievement, if you can see your progress and you can see that the next milestone is just around the corner, you're more likely to keep going. If you know that you're not alone in that and you're working with others, and that sense of belonging and then that drives you to want to achieve it, not just for yourself, but for others. And having that purpose, all of that sort of drives towards this sense of purpose. But if you can also have that story underlying link to your purpose of your organization, that becomes even more powerful. So, yeah, hopefully that answers that question anyway.
You answered a couple of mine actually through that answer, because I talk purpose all day long, and I had some questions.
That's what attracted me to this podcast, to be honest. I love the thought that purpose is so important. So yeah, sorry. Go.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So you were talking about that, and I thought, well, that's so fascinating. I'd love to understand who the ideal client is for you for Centrical or for gamification.
Look, I think the ideal client is, I think if you take away the commercials side of it and you just focused on, if you had a perfect client that wanted to make your product as successful as possible, then it would be a client who is doing it for the right reasons, to drive engagement, to drive to create a collaborative culture that understands that learning is often has to be initiated by a trigger. A client who is curious and open to try new things. And I also think it's somebody a client that actually really cares for their employees, first and foremost, and understands that by creating an amazing employee experience, you set amazing foundations to create a great customer experience.
And would you say that in order for this to work, a company or a business needs to be in touch with their purpose and have a clearly articulated purpose that they've shared, and that it's got some meaning and translatability to their employees?
I think they need to have a clear purpose, and I think that maybe they haven't been able to communicate it though. Often that's a big one that we see a lot, is that they've got this great purpose, but they're not able to translate that into how does that apply to every single person's role within the organization. So that's actually ideal for us, because that's what we help solve for. So that's always a good one. But yeah, having a clear purpose. I mean, that's if you don't have that clear purpose, it makes it quite challenging to then tell somebody, hey, you need to do this widget because, and then there's a big ...
Yeah.
because you can't answer the question. So yeah, purpose is so important.
And Luke, how is 6-star resonates with this? What is a 6-star experience in your field? If you can formulate that for us.
Yeah. Look, I think a 6-star experience, it becomes more a partnership in that regard. So instead of just that relationship where you're a vendor and or a service provider, that you become a co-creator and a partner in that regard. I think that for us that's really important that we're seen as a partner, not as just a vendor. It's so easy to, especially in the SaaS space, where it can be, yeah, buy the license, see you later, it's all over to you. We don't, that is not how we do things. We really pride ourselves on our customer success, building that relationship, and having a relationship with a client. And that's often where some of our best ideas actually come from, and our best innovations come from, because it comes from a client that says, we've got this need, how do we solve for that? And we work together to find solutions, and we're in a unique space where we can roll out those changes easily and effectively, and see the instant benefit of it. And so I think that how you create a 6-star experience is you don't see yourself as the vendor, you see yourself as a partner, and the client does as well.
Oh, I love that. You've touched on a couple of really huge points that a lot of our conversations seem to center around or move around. And that one of them is collaboration and care, and the whole partnership aspect rather than a transactional relationship. So the relationship that you're saying that you have with your customers is not necessarily just being seen as a vendor. I absolutely agree. And you mentioned that some of the best outcomes and ideas have come when you're in that space together. And that's where this magic, this co-creative magic happens, when you are both open and you, assuming you've tapped into a bigger purpose. And all of a sudden it's a lot more than just one person or one piece of technology or one person's idea. You have these people all putting in, there's all these ingredients, and there's an alchemical process and reaction that happens to then create something that you couldn't even have thought of on your own. And that's the magic of working together.
I think if we think about, and I know it's not really framed as a question, but I was thinking about some of those moments for us, around. It's really easy to pigeonhole yourself into, either gamification or a micro learning performance platform, but this is where we recently rolled out things like contributions, which is where we allow end users to actually share their knowledge with other people. So it's one of those interesting ones that I think for organizations it can be really scary, because you've got for particularly in like highly regulated industries where it's like follow the scripting by the letter of the law. Don't ask a colleague. Go to your source of truth. But that comes from this place of fear and mistrust. And one of the sort of going back to the intrinsic drivers, and one of the things I always found, particularly in the contact center space, where you had this wide range of age groups, and often people would ask me, oh, is this for one sort of generation? Is this for your Gen Ys, Gen Zs, whatever, the Gen Next, right? It's I was like, no, of course not. This is for everyone. We all have the same drivers. Those drivers might change over time. If you've been in the industry for 40 years and you're nearing retirement and you're taking a contact center job because A, the hours suit you, B, maybe there's no physical labor, and then finally you've got this lifetime of experience and knowledge that you want to impart on others and share with others and use to help other people, yet the KPIs or the organization doesn't reward that. You're never going to get that intrinsic fulfillment. And so things like being the opportunity to share your knowledge with others and coach other people, that gives people so much fulfillment in their roles. And so to be able to enable that is super powerful in that space. So yeah. Anyway, I'll step back.
No, this is all about you. The spotlight is on you, Luke, and I'm absolutely loving this. And yeah, the whole thing about containing and keeping that learned knowledge together is massively important. Otherwise, it disappears. And I feel that historically, a lot of companies, certainly through my experience in the corporate world, didn't honor that or didn't value it. And so it would leave when people left. And it sounds to me like what you're noticing and what you've been able to create there is a space for that to be contained, and then you build on this knowledge bank, and giving people meaning by the opportunity to share.
Yeah,
Which is
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. People, I think particularly of late when people are leaving roles so easily, particularly in Australia, we're in a really interesting spot. We talk a lot about. There's been a lot of talk about the Great Resignation, and look, there is a lot of movement happening for sure. But our unemployment is also at its lowest in history, and so what that says to me is if people are leaving your organization, it's not because they're going just to start a side hustle, which is what I think the Great Resignation kind of alludes to in a lot of spaces. It's like, oh, people are just leaving to go and work on Fiverr. No, they're not. They're actually going somewhere else. They're going to another organization that actually is valuing their skills. And the big part, I think, when you look at a lot of the research papers, there's a constant theme in there, and that is that people are moving to another organization because it ties in closer to their purpose. So they're not leaving for money. They're not leaving for flexibility. They're leaving for purpose. And if an organization cannot link the work you do with the overall organizational purpose, and then also tie that into your personal meaning and personal purpose, then yeah, people are going to leave. And so I think we're in a very unique environment at the moment where knowledge is super valuable. If all of a sudden that's leaving to other organizations, you're in trouble. So look, how do you combat that? You need to be able to get people to remember their knowledge quicker, faster, retain that knowledge, because traditional ways of learning, such as classrooms and the like, there's this imaginary black hole that sits at the door, right? You step out past the classroom and you lose 70% of all the knowledge you've just learned. So how do you combat that? Secondly, then how do you retain that knowledge? And that's where the employee engagement, intrinsic motivations, and the retention of your staff becomes super, super important. Yeah.
And Luke, have you got a specific example of a major breakthrough that could contribute to something that was just way out of the normal thinking, and that has brought in probably maybe more income? There's been an innovation based on that idea or sharing their expertise and knowledge. Are you able to story about that?
Look, I think I don't want to just go making up stories to be able to answer a question. But what we have seen is a greater engagement with the platform. So what we've seen is a real shift to more people engaging with the platform on a more regular basis. And the second part is we've also attributed to that a whole heap of achievements as well. And the thing about achievements is they always have to have meaning behind them. If you just put a badge or something on something that doesn't require any effort, it's meaningless. Therefore, it holds no worth. When you think about knowledge, people have a thirst for knowledge, but it has to be driven by something. Once that driver is connected and they learn something, they then put a value on it themselves. They put their own personal value around the knowledge that they've learned. They then nurture that knowledge, and it's upon that nurturing of that knowledge that they add value and want to protect that and keep that knowledge. And that's when you get these people starting to share. That's the moment they start to share them. So you need to be able to give people the opportunity to share that, whether they need to share the knowledge itself or at least share the fact that they know that. And so we, when it comes to things like badging, we always make sure that it has to have meaning around it. Otherwise, it has to be a digital representation of the effort and the value that someone's put around that achievement. What we have seen is the increase of the number of so we generate a badge that represents the amount of contributions that you've shared, how many people have upvoted that, and how many people have liked it. What we've seen is a big increase in the amount of people sharing that digital badge on things like socials. So we know that there's a real desire to be able to share and collect that knowledge.
Is gamification the be all and end all for employee engagement?
No, it's not. I've been asked if it's the silver bullet, and I don't think there is such a thing as a silver bullet in any technology. And I think if you're selling that, then you're selling snake oil. No, it's not. It's not the be all and end all. But what it does do is it's a new story. It's a new way of telling the story. It's a new way of thinking around how do you measure and quantify the effort that is put into things. I think what it is it's a much more holistic approach to how we work, and I think that's a step in the right direction. Look, it's not going to solve everything, and sometimes it creates more sometimes it does create challenges that you unexpected challenges. That maybe. I'll give you an example of that. One, I remember rolling out something with a client. They were sure that it was going to show that their underperformers really clearly where they were underperforming, and it kind of had the opposite effect. And it actually showed that their underperformers were actually achieving all these goals that were just never realized. And so then they were like, well, we were going to performance manage those people out, and now this new measure is not going to allow us to do that. I'm like, so they actually saw that as a problem. I personally was like, wasn't this a good thing? Hey, you're going to, hopefully we're retaining these staff. We're not going to spend more money on recruitment. You've found that there's a new way to actually value your employees. You've found these new skills that you didn't realize that were there before. So, it is a change of thinking for not just the end users, but the managers and the business. So yeah, it's like anything. It's there's pros and cons, but I definitely think there's way, 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 way more pros than there is cons.
Given this is obviously Well, it's fairly new. It hasn't. I'm sure you'd know the stats on how many organisations of certain sizes haven't actually adopted this yet. Is there opportunities that you see in particular size businesses for this, or particular industries?
Yeah, look, I think there's some really obvious ones. I think the obvious ones are, around where you've got highly measurable parts of your business, where it's contact centers is ideal. Every breath that someone takes needs to be able to be measured in that space. Back office, of course, all these sort of manufacturing, all these sort of where you've widgetized someone's workload. That's an obvious use case because you've got lots of data. But I actually think that the opportunity lies in broader organizations being able to step back. Because I think, you often, I know when I was working in sort of the big corporates, you would often question when it got to the end of your performance review. You're sitting here laying out your case as to why you get 5 out of 5, and you've got all the data and all, and the reports, and you're laying them all out. And then that your colleague who doesn't have all that is also doing a great job, but they're not able to prove it other than on this sort of project basis. And it's like, oh, look, we created a new landing page on our website, and we did this marketing piece, and it was really popular. I think there's opportunities to be able to sort of bring those, sort of find the middle ground there, where you're not just recognizing the minute details of what's been achieved on a spreadsheet, but also bring in some of the overall successes and the collaboration that happens across an organization, and to be able to tell that story in a really unique way. I think that's where the opportunity lies. I don't think anyone's solved for that yet, but I think that I think there is a place for things like gamification, and micro learning, and to solve for those sort of things.
Mm, mm. Is it appropriate for a smaller business?
Yeah, I think it is, absolutely. I think you just need to tread careful on some of the game mechanics, right? So I always, leaderboards are always a really interesting point of contention. If you're um, Nate Brown recently said this, and I'm gonna steal it from him because it was such a good quote. But when you've got when you've got a bunch of winners, you've got a whole bunch of losers. And so the problem with leaderboards is if you're if you're only highlighting these few people who are winning, then all these people are feeling disengaged at the bottom of the leaderboard. So you need to be really careful how and you choose which game mechanics are going to fit. It can definitely work for small organizations, particularly if it's going to be around collaboration and learning, and um, group, like progressing together, these group achievements that, and using things like challenges and stories. Using those game mechanics in a small environment is perfect.
Mm. Not having used it myself, because I've been out of corporate for 13 odd years, yet heard about it and seen that it's been used. So I'm relying on just drawing on your knowledge on this. Has it hindered or damaged human interaction in the workplace in any way because it's reliant on technology, or does it enhance it?
Oh, I that's awesome, and I think it definitely enhances it, and that's not the easy answer. I genuinely believe that, because what it does is it, for the first time, allows people to have that humble brag, to be able to give each other kudos, for those recognitions. The Centrical platform is a very social platform. We have the ability to create chats and kudos where you recognize other people, and that can be shared publicly or privately. Um, and also, the sharing of things like badges and things like that, and to be able to then share those wider outside of the platform itself, be able to share them on LinkedIn and in Teams and all these sort of things, drives more conversation. And I always, when we talk about when I'm sort of pitching this product to somebody, and we start talking about things like the augmented coaching, where the platform is helping a leader, and by giving them insights as to who to coach, when to coach, and what to coach them on, and then going one step further and actually giving them, using AI to actually give them content to share with that person. What it's doing is it's taking a huge monkey off the back of the manager. No longer are they getting their head stuck in spreadsheets. They're now able to have their heart in the job, which is around developing their people and having valuable conversations. And the question I often get is, oh, well, doesn't that replace the role of the manager? And I think absolutely not. What it does is it takes all of the prelude that happens before that really valuable conversation with a manager. You think about, I think back to when I was in that corporate space, and you've got a team maybe of 15 people, and you've got to get through every one of them in a fortnight. And that's a lot of work, because you need to be thinking, before you go into that meeting, if you want it to be valuable, you need to have done all the prep. You need to have understood where they're at, what are they working on, what are their challenges, what have you done to help them in that space. If you go into that meeting unprepared, then you're wasting their time, you're wasting your own time, and you're also you don't look that competent either. And so because your head's been too focused on the wrong things. If you can go into those conversations and already say, hey, I've already sent you that coaching, we did all that sort of stuff online, I want to see how you went with it, how'd you feel about it. You've got something to actually anchor back to on those conversations. So for me, I actually think that done right, it actually drives better engagement, more high value conversation, because it's removing all of the low value activities that are getting that take up a lot of a manager's time.
Yeah, I can see that. This is the Six Star Business Podcast, and I'd love to know from, in your words, what a six-star business means to you.
Yeah, look, a 6-star business, what it means to me is it's a business that understands who they are, understands what value they bring, and understands that value is worthless without the right partners in their clients. And so a 6-star business is, it's not just, actually, there was a really interesting question on Twitter today, which was around, can you name, it was part of the CX question of the day, can you name an organization that's got a really high NPS but provides a terrible customer experience? And I thought it was a really interesting question, because, and I think it lends to your question, and that is that you can have an amazing product, and people can really love your product, but can get treated like garbage through the process. And I think that might be a 4-star business. I think a 5-star business has a great product and a great customer experience, but I think a 6-star business not only has a great product, not only creates a great customer experience, but creates a great story for both organizations.
Internally and externally,
Mm.
because that would then lead into having the internal customers, i.e. employees, all aligned with the customers.
Absolutely. Yeah, bang on.
Yeah, love it. I know we're coming down to the wire here. Indra, have you got any final questions for Luke?
I was just wondering about how you could have teams in place in introducing your new initiative to change the environment. How, because there are those who always want to stand out, and they are driven by, how do you handle them in in in, in bringing in your change?
If I understand your question correctly, that you potentially have different correct me if I'm wrong, that you're asking if you got people with different ideas of what success looks like, and how do you bring them together?
Mm. Yeah.
So yeah, so I think, yeah, it's a good question, and I think you need to tie it back to what it is you're trying to achieve. I think, I mean, I can talk about that from a platform solution perspective, really, really easily. And the way we do that is that we have things like dynamic grouping, which allows the right different content for different types of segmentations. So you might have people who are highly skilled knowledge experts. You might have people who are brand new. They both had the same goal. Same goal is to achieve their targets, but a very different way of achieving them, right? So, and so we have things like dynamic grouping that's only going to send content that's designed for people who have a whole heap of knowledge and are already experts in that field. And we've got and that are probably on a bit more of a cyclical journey, where it's about maintaining versus reaching an end goal. And then you've got these new people who their end goal is to get proficient enough to do the job, and they're going to get content that's probably not so rich in its content. So from a platform perspective, that's probably a lot easier to answer. I think from a change management perspective, and how do we bring those pieces together from an implementation and different goals. It's really important to be able to convey through the process, both from a central side and also a client side. And I'm going to go back to Aveline's, sort of MO, which is around purpose. Both understanding what that purpose is and anchoring to that, because if you can then show how maybe a left of field approach is still going to anchor back to the purpose and get those same results, then it reduces a lot of that friction, and that's what our customer success team is all about. Is about finding what it is that is the driver, the core driver. What's the purpose, and how do we think differently? How do we challenge you to think differently to achieve that goal, whilst also getting an amazing byproduct, which is engaged employees.
Yeah, it's brilliant. Um, we're coming into a close, and I'd really love to finish up by asking you, Luke, is there a tidbit of advice or a little nugget that you could leave our listeners with today after all the amazing things you've already shared?
Oh, okay. So yeah, far out. If I had to sort of boil it all down into a couple of things, it would be this. It would be that what uh, an employee, if you got to put yourself in an employee's shoes as an organization and think the best in them to start with. So always start with the positive, because people don't get up in the morning to do a terrible job. They actually think, most people's motto is, what good am I going to do today? Because that good feeds their soul, and you need to be able to foster an environment that actually allows that. And remember that as an employer, as a manager, because you're all the same. You want to get up and do a good job, but it's so easy to focus on the negative. All the people that aren't hitting the KPIs or aren't doing the things that you wish them to do for you to be successful, for your organization to be successful. So it's really easy to focus on the negative. But remember that people want to do a good job, and it's your job to find a way to allow them to do a good job. So yeah, be kind, see the best in people, and know that there is common ground in that.
Thank you, Luke. I really resonate with that, and I'm sure if others do as well. You've given us so much, and I really appreciate your time on our podcast today and learning all about really linking purpose to gamification for the benefit of employees and therefore the whole ecosystem, because that's effectively where that impact is made, right?
It's a nice summary, yeah. And thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Andra.
Thanks, Luke. It was amazing.